the detonation happens, the reason is not as much the sparks as the powder keg or the state of the prairie. And the South African prairie, and the data I've given you on jobs and the like, is tinder dry, and it takes just one spark to let it take off.
There are many conspiracy theories being put forward by the government and also the mainstream media about the reasons for the violence and looting that swept through KZN and Gauteng last week. But are these conspiracy theories valid? Is there any evidence for them? Joining me to discuss is Frans Cronje, Director of the Centre for Risk Analysis. Frans, what do you make of these allegations that we've been seeing from the government and also in the media of late?
David, we're very skeptical of those. Look, any protest action will have a degree of planning behind it. There will be people who initiated the protest. They will have an objective to remove a corrupt politician or challenge poor service delivery or whatever the case was. In organizing that protest, they'll meet each other, they'll establish WhatsApp groups, they'll tweet about the protest, they'll try and get people out onto the streets. All of these things are part and parcel of normal run-of-the-mill protest action. That's number one. Number two, South Africa has very high levels of violent protest action. We've charted those. They're on your screen at the moment. You can have a look. That trend line tracks over a period of about 20 years the number of violent protest actions that occur in the country. So on any day of the week, there are a great many of these. They're all planned, they're all incited, they're all put into operation. None of this is unusual. The fact that there was meetings about the protests of a week ago in Natal and Gauteng, the fact that these were publicized, the fact that notes were sent around saying get people out onto the streets, it's easy to see how to the uninitiated that can be made to look like a grand conspiracy to overthrow the government. The fact that military-level hardware was used in assaults on shopping malls, that sounds really frightening, but it happens quite often. The cash and transit robbery industry, for example, the expert manner in which ATM machines are blown up so as not to destroy the cash inside. These things go on all the time. So I'm skeptical that the fact that these elements are present to the protests of a week ago is enough to suggest that there was a drive here at insurrection, an attempt to overthrow the government, even if that was just the case in KwaZulu-Natal and perhaps in Gauteng.
Enjoying this analysis? Click here to sign up for our 30-day free trial for more content from the CIA.
Much has been made, Frans, of the so-called 12 persons of interest, and we analyzed these allegations in our Monday morning risk alert. Do you care to share with our viewers what were some of your assessments of these so-called 12 dwarfs, as we refer to them as?
Well, we call them the 12 dwarfs of insurrection. What my sense is this. The protests blew up. The South African government was caught completely off guard. There was a panic within the Ramaphosa administration. Some of his advisors felt it was very important to get him out of the way. Less blame for the protests landed on two areas. The first was the very slow, stagnant reform process in the country. And the second, the consequences of the economic lockdown that did such harm. Now, both areas, I think he carries blame for helping to maintain an environment of such great socio-economic trauma that a little bit of nudging can set off protests. In the event of trying to cover for him, the story is created that there were conspirators, that this was planned to destabilize the country, perhaps even overthrow its government. And that if these conspirators could be arrested and brought to trial, then we would go back to the peace and stability, the status quo of the new dawn and the rebirth and the recovery, that the narrative to date around Mr. Ramaphosa had been quite effective in maintaining. The story is starting to fall apart, though. The defense minister has said that they see no evidence of this kind of insurrection. The police say they might have found something. The intelligence services, they say they told the defense people. The defense people say if that happened, they never got the message. The 12 have not been arrested to date. I think one of them might have been, but it's unclear who they are to begin with. And I said in the note this morning that even if this 12 or any 12 are arrested at some point in the future, you will be struck by how pedestrian they seem. They will not seem to you like the type of people who have the cunning, the skill, the guile, the state and the spycraft to plan such a monstrous insurrection against the state, and to do so very brilliantly that the state security services were unaware of it until the moment that it broke. So the balance of the evidence for me is this is a political story to try and draw attention away from what we read as the root underpinnings of the protest, which is a stagnant economy, an absence of reform, and great damage caused to living standards as a consequence of South Africa's economic lockdown decisions.
So, Frans, if it wasn't a conspiracy, what caused last week's blow-up?
Well, what caused last week's blow-up is essentially the following. At present, the number of people with a job in South Africa is only about 500,000 higher than was the case when Thabo Mbeki vacated his office around about a decade ago. Real per capita GDP in South Africa is lower now than it was when Thabo Mbeki vacated his office. Only 4% of children pass maths in matric with a grade of 50% or higher. The unemployment rate amongst young people is far above 50%. There are now more people in South Africa who are entitled to vote but don't than the number of people who vote for the ANC. That shows you the amount of disillusionment going on. And our polls, you know, if you attend our briefing, show that for people under the age of 50, ANC support has fallen to below 50%. Now, I'm indebted to James Myburgh. He runs the excellent website Politics Web that you should read. And in a discussion with James last week, where I asked him for his advice on what he thinks has happened here, he pointed me towards a letter, a quote of which, bits of which might appear on your screen, written by Mao in 1930 to his revolutionary comrades when their enthusiasm and confidence in the prospects of revolution in China were flagging. And Mao explained to them, if you read the whole document, that look at what's happening in the country schools. Young people aren't getting the education they need. Professional people aren't, qualified people aren't finding jobs anymore. He talks about taxes. He talks about the difficulty of paying rent. And what he says is the Chinese landscape is like a prairie that's tinder dry. And he says it takes just one spark to start a prairie fire. Now, it's important to look at the sparks. You must look at them. They are important. We must investigate what they were. And where there was incitement to violence, the people responsible must be prosecuted. Of course, we're not dismissing that at all. But what we're saying is that it's probably useful to pay a lot more attention to the state of the prairie than to the sparks. There will always be sparks. There will always be anarchist movements in countries, revolutionaries, people trying to challenge the state. And in a fragmented political environment like South Africa, just the fragmentation within the ANC, the infighting, the conflict, we're going to shower sparks on the country. That must be the case. But when the detonation happens, the reason is not as much the sparks as the powder keg or the state of the prairie. And the South African prairie, and the data I've given you on jobs and the like, is tinder dry. And it takes just one spark to let it take off. And that, I think, is on the balance of the evidence, what happened here 10 days ago.
Thanks very much, Frans. Let's hand over to you, our viewers. What do you make of the conspiracy theories being put forward by the government? Do you think that they have any validity? Also, if you are a client of the CRA, you're invited to our exclusive client webinar that's taking place this Wednesday, tomorrow at 6 o'clock. There are details to this event which will be circulated to clients via email. You can register through that route. And if you're not yet a client of the CRA, you can join us on our 30-day free trial. There's a link in the description below, as well as in the pinned comment, where you can sign up for our trial and access the webinar through that route. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.